struggling to let go after a relationship with a fearful avoidant. One of the members of the Reconnection Co community has reached out and shared a bit of their experience with me and has asked for some general insights and clarity on a few elements of their experience, and they're happy for me to share their experience with the wider community with my insights for a little bit of education and hopefully a little bit of group validation, because I know that they are not the only person who has gone through an experience like this. So the key points I want to hone in on in this video is the struggles of letting go 6 months after the breakup, holding on to the hope that their ex is going to return, and some insights whether or not a relationship is doomed to fail if someone is a fearful avoidant and they are completely unaware that they are. Now, before we get any further into this, I have been given permission to share this story from the author, and the purpose of sharing the story is for education purposes only. None of the information that I share on the Reconnection Co platforms is designed to be taken as individualised advice, mental health advice, healthcare advice. So again, whilst it is very evidence-informed, none of it is to be taken as individualised advice. Let's get into the background. I was in a 1 year long distance relationship with my ex-girlfriend. I'm pretty sure she is a fearful avoidant after doing some research. I met her while she was pregnant, not by me, but by her narcissistic ex. I supported her throughout the pregnancy and shared the first few months with her and her baby. After some time, she closed the long distance and lived with me for 3 months. This is when things began to fall apart. Prior to moving in, the long distance relationship had been wonderful. She would often come to visit me and would stay for at least 1 month. But once she moved in, the conflicts began. She was often irritable, didn't communicate her emotions, insulted me during arguments, and could barely say sorry. After the 3 months, she then found her own apartment and left. Initially, I convinced her for a new start with the new distance of having her own place. She agreed and we slept together for the last time. 2 days after this, she broke up with me again. A month later, I saw a photo of her kissing an acquaintance of hers. I'm pretty sure he's a rebound. I guess he is an anxious preoccupied and he's not really in her league. He posted the photo. She never shows boyfriends on her Instagram. She doesn't know that she's a fearful avoidant. She's in her mid-30s and has had almost 10 relationships. The longest of these was a few years. I don't think she cheated or monkey branched. She just couldn't be alone and took the first best who came along because of our intense time. And so where we're landing at is I'm really struggling to let go. It's more than 6 months now. I'm still hoping she returns. Is a relationship possible if she doesn't know she's a fearful avoidant, or is it doomed to fail? What's my general opinion on this situation? First of all, I just wanted to say I am sorry that you have gone through that, especially taking care of someone in a time of need when they're in such a vulnerable position, being pregnant and then being around the first few months of the baby's life. When kids are involved and they are all of a sudden out of the picture, it is incredibly gut-wrenching, and it just adds another layer of pain and complexity to these situations. So there's a few emotional themes playing out here. Firstly, we've got the unresolved grief, still hoping for her to return 6 months later, which is very normal. If we're looking at things as far as breakups from avoidant attachers, 6 months is still quite early days, especially if it was a trauma bond. Some people, it can take 12, 24, 36 months to truly get over a breakup. So even though time slows down when you're trying to emotionally move through these breakup situations, 6 months still is quite early days. And it does sound like there is probably a fair amount of unresolved emotional elements that are playing out, which is making it quite hard to move through it. Cognitive dissonance is really coming to town here. Knowing that she's a fearful avoidant, knowing that she's got a lot going on, knowing that she's not aware of that, but still craving that reunion. So it's very common for us, if have been in a relationship with a fearful avoidant, not just fearful avoidant, but avoidance in general, and even some anxious attachers. If we've been in a relationship with someone with a relatively severe insecure attachment style, that cognitive dissonance can really do a number on us. On one hand, we can know that they are phenomenally emotionally unhealthy for us, but then there are so many elements and characteristics of them as a person that is genuinely likable or lovable. And trying to reconcile those two elements of who they are is so difficult. So you'll find that a lot of people can end up marrying themselves to one or the other. So they'll either still really want them back and just see the kind elements and sort of to an extent can ignore some of the unhealthy parts. But then you have other people that really lean into the circle jerk of hating their ex, and it's a lot of anger that is just spewed out at their ex. And the real and it's the hardest part to get through, processing that cognitive dissonance and get through it. It's reconciling those two elements that are at play. It's the good, but also the bad, because at the end of the day, they are one and the same person. You just saw different parts of them at different times in the relationship. So long story short, is she a fearful avoidant? I don't know for sure. But if it walks like a duck, it could potentially be a duck. But what's very important to recognize is trying to diagnose anyone isn't the solution to move forward. It's our own self-awareness and what is keeping us stuck, that is the important part. Her level of emotional availability is probably going to be quite low. And if someone's emotional availability, even with themselves, is quite low, because for the next however long it is, I don't know how old the child is now, but the first few years, everything is likely going to be given to the child. So her healing work is probably going to take a back seat. And with all of that considered, it is very unlikely that she's going to be emotionally available to show up as a healthy partner. So at this stage, what I would say is probably a bit more of a healthy approach is looking inward. And this is shifting from that analysis of her and her behaviour to our self-analysis and understanding ourselves and that sort of self-regulation, what areas we need to work on. So identifying and understanding our own attachment response, why we were attracted to someone like that in the first place. And one thing that's very hard is learning to grieve the fantasy. And this is one of the traps that many people fall into with long-distance relationships, because when you're in a long-distance relationship, it is very easy to build a fantasy. So you've just got some text messages and our brain fills in a lot of those gaps. And then when you come together, sometimes the person that you've painted in your mind, even though you might have been texting or talking over the phone, the person that we've painted in our mind might not actually marry up to who they actually are as a person. And we can very much get stuck on that dopamine-driven fantasy that we've created about this person. And like I said, we've got that cognitive dissonance playing out. We've got that lovable, kind person that you probably fell in love with, plus the person who was quite emotionally unhealthy. And so I think at this point, one of the biggest things to focus on is a little bit of that internal work. And it might be reaching out to a therapist or a counsellor or someone that might be able to help guide you through that process. But having a little bit of a closer look at the rescuer role that was playing out, because I think that, in my opinion, I might be wrong, but just in my opinion, outside looking in, that's probably the biggest area that might require attention and might help give you some traction in moving forward at this stage. So for this, if you fell into the role of being a little bit of a rescuer or the savior in this situation, these are common situations that might play out in adulthood. I'm not saying this definitely has happened for you, but it can play out in adulthood, where if we fall into this savior role and that rescuer role, oftentimes it is when we were somewhat parentified as children. So we might have been taking care of all of our siblings because our parents were overwhelmed or they were working a lot, or mum and dad split up and then whatever parent that you were living with, they were just dumping a lot of their emotional baggage onto the child. So essentially just burden shifting a lot of their own internal shit onto the child. And so as a child, many can kind of learn that love is essentially an act of service. So they give and give and give and give, and that's often what will give them that positive feedback from their parents. And so it builds that I've got to give to get love. And so as adults, you can often find yourself gravitating towards the projects, not the partners. And that in itself creates an unhealthy relationship dynamic because it's not equal, because one is taking on that caretaker role. So hopefully this has given you a little bit of an insight into a quite complex situation, but also a little bit of a look into the attachment theory lens and where some of our own things might be playing out and how that feeds into a relationship dynamic. So if you've resonated with this, drop a like or a comment, and I'll catch you in the next one.